Hello, my name is Philip Goslan, and thank you for watching. This is the first edition of the Newtown podcast. And for those who don't know what Newtown is a cultural certification which allows us consumers to easily find culture that's been produced by free-thinking creators and artists, so that you can support them and that you can consume what they have to offer. And so with this new series of podcasts, which is called the Newtown Podium, we're going to have such artists that will come on stage, that will discuss who they are, will discuss what they do, and have a sample of their work as well, depending on what they on what they do specifically. And you'll learn about them on a personal level, on a professional level. What have they done so far? What are their hopes in the future, and the struggles that they face nowadays because of what's going on in culture at large, as well as the cultural industries. And these are meant to be short but intense talks, ranging, probably around 45 minutes. And they will come out, maybe once or twice, probably 3 times a month. And you're welcome to watch our archive as well as it grows. And so for today, we have Entropyrian, who's a musician, songwriter as well, and he has a metal project that he's going to talk to us about. Now, before I jump into this, I'd like to share with you that Entropyrian wishes to remain anonymous, so you will see his logo throughout this episode of the podcast. So that's normal, and of course, Newtown respects the wishes of artists who wish to remain the way they are. That's completely fine by us. And for some of them, there's a lot of artists out there who fear cancellation or repercussions for speaking their mind. So if they wish for anonymity, then we're more than happy to oblige. And so without further ado, let's start with listening to an excerpt from Entropyrian's Freya piece, and then we're going to jump in with him right after. Okay, so let's meet Entropyrian. So how are you doing, sir?
Doing well. You?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. So I chose Freya because it was the first piece that I listened to when I visited your website, and it struck me. As a filmmaker, it's very soundtrack. It has a very much soundtrack feeling, and to me, it sounds a lot like it could fit vast science fiction images as well as medieval fantasy one, and it was just a nice it was just a great introduction. So why don't you let's start with this piece and how it came about to you and your process.
Well, thank you. The song came about because I bought a new synthesizer and I was playing with it. At the time, I was listening to a lot of Heilung, a lot of Danheim, these bands that make ancient sounding Celtic music or Viking style music, and um, they're the soundtrack to what was the video game, the Xbox video game with the woman who's losing her mind.
Yes, yes. It's funny because I was actually thinking about that game yesterday, and I couldn't remember it too. Right. So, but I see exactly what you mean. Please go on. I'll find it for you here.
Yeah, and of course Skyrim, right?
Yes.
That would be, I think, a lot of people's introduction to the kind of Nordic music that honestly I really like. So I was playing with this new synthesizer, and it was a bunch of epic sounding horns and woodwinds and strings, and that came out. Sometimes you just play around with the synth, and you're just going through different presets and seeing what all the parameters do. And when you're doing that with a synthesizer, you're doing it and you're playing things that sound good to you. Basically, uh, this actually gets into the point of where I realized that I love music in my life. It was when I had an old Casio keyboard, and I was clicking through the sounds and just playing something on every single one because I really liked how it sounded, and I would just fiddle around with the keyboard and find different what progressions sounded good with what sounds, and that's still how I make music today a lot of the time.
Yeah. The game is Hellblade,
Hellblade.
Senua's Sacrifice. And you know what? Come to think of it, because I played that game, and it would actually fit that game extremely well. I would advise you to get in touch with the developer. Who knows, right? They might get you on board for their next game. So tell me, how did you sort of discover music and your inspiration, throughout your sort of life so far?
So I always knew I loved it, but um, I didn't always know that I could make it. I always knew I wanted to. I never had any training. I fiddled around with cheap keyboards and acoustic guitars that people had laying around until I was in my early teens, and um, I was given an electric guitar. And when you're in your early teens, you're kind of looking for an identity, something to latch onto that's like your thing. So my electric guitar became my thing, and I got decently good at it. I learned to play a lot of Metallica, a lot of Creed, because Creed was popular at the time.
Mm.
And those guitar books, the guitar tab books, were my Bible. I would travel with them, and my Fender Stratocaster was my best friend for a little while. it was uh, it was a variety of genres as well. So it started out with maybe Metallica and Creed, and then went on to Slipknot, maybe some new metal, very new metal at that time, a lot of new metal before it got heavier into a lot of actually Christian music.
Mm.
That So if you've heard of a band called Extol, I think they won Metal Album of the Year for Norway or something, and they're a Christian band. It's
Mm.
really surprising to a lot of people to hear that, but uh, Christian metal, because my parents were religious and they didn't like me listening to Metallica and they didn't like me listening to Slipknot, so I tried to appease that a little bit by listening to some Christian metal. But the funny thing about that was that at that time, Christian metal was so underground. It was the heaviest music any of my friends had ever heard. It was
Mm.
just melt their face off, black metal, death metal, doom metal, all this stuff. And so that was a bit interesting. All my friends were running around listening to Slipknot, and I'm listening to some Norwegian black metal. It's kind of funny.
And so that kind of, over the years, I would assume it led you to, to create Entropyrian, right? So how did that came about, and why did you create Entropyrian, and what are your plans for it in the coming future?
So ever since I was a teenager, I'd been recording my own material. I've played with a couple of different bands, trying to make something of them, uh, to varying degrees of seriousness. And but I had never published my own solo work out to the general public. I recorded some things and sent them to friends, but I had never gone and tried to see how my music would do in general in public. And Entropyrian started when really I moved states and I got a new house, and this house had the room for me to make my studio. And making my studio and having a space in which to record vocals, especially, and then paired with that, the advance of music technology. So
Mm.
amp simulators, Get Good Drums. That's a drumming plugin that just sounds fantastic. The technology to make a lot with a little leapt forward over the last 5 to 10 years, and I've been able to take advantage of that and basically be a one-man band, uh, and make my own stuff for the first time. What caused me to start it when I did was that I've always been quite a hothead as far as my political takes and everything. And last year, about when the vax mandates came into play, I thought that was so over the top. I thought that was so absurd, so far gone from what I want this country and this world to be, that I felt like, well, speak now or forever hold your peace. Speak up or don't ever again. We're heading in a direction I didn't want to go. So I decided to uh, kill two birds with one stone, start speaking up and do the music I had been practicing for so long and loved so much.
And so, where does the name Entropyrian comes from?
Actually, a bit of a well, there's a good bit behind it. The concept of entropy is the inevitable slide toward disorder. In it's a force of nature. It's a force of physics. To get poetic about it, you could call it the God killer. It's the thing
Mm.
that's going to end the universe. It's the thing that's going to cause all energy and life to eventually be snuffed out. Now, hold that thought and consider a sort of a hack to getting things done. Say you've got to get something done and you're thinking about doing it in 2 months. Okay, I'm going to do it incrementally. I'm going to do a little bit every day for 2 months. Well, there's a hack that you can do where if you say, nope, I'm going to get it this week, and your mind is fully focused, fully engaged with overcoming an obstacle or gaining an accomplishment, you can get so much done so fast. You can, when your mind is fully addressing a problem, there's two ways to address a problem. One way is sort of passive, and you're like, okay, what do I need to do this? Okay, I'll just do that. And the other is you're continually analyzing what needs to be done to fix that problem. And your mind is fully engaged, you're optimizing your processes, and this leads to massive progress. So basically, what I would call that hack or strategy is sort of shooting for the stars and hitting the moon, overshooting the goal. You're going to get there faster. You're going to fully engage yourself. So I see humanity's goal as lasting through the end of the universe,
Mm.
beating entropy, beating physics. If you look at that as your goal, everything we're facing right now seems small.
Mm.
And when you think about it, entropy is the inevitable slide toward disorder of everything. So every time you breathe, every time you clean your kitchen, every time you go to work, you're fighting entropy. You're fighting the disorder that accumulates in your life. So Entropyrian, as a name for me, represents this fight against disorder, this fight against the slide into chaos, this fight against nothingness,
Yeah.
raging against the dying of the light, basically, as a word.
Yeah. So, you clearly use this project as a means for you to speak against the mainstream. I mean, what sort of spurred you initially was the vax mandate, right? But I'm sure that wasn't the only reason, behind your choice to start this project. So if you can tell us more about this.
Radicalization. I've seen people around me slowly lose their faculties, lose their ability to see things that were so plain to them before. Uh, and it's been a very creeping process for, I would say, I think I probably first became aware of it about 7 years ago. I mean, Gamergate, woo!
Mm.
Uh, as much as people joke about it, it was a really sharp turning point for a
Yeah.
lot of people and a lot of culture. And I forgive me if I go off on a tiny tangent here. Everyone's wrong about Gamergate.
Yeah.
Everyone. Because it's not about ethics in game journalism. If it were that, it would have been a week-long thing.
Yeah.
And it's not about harassing women. If that it were that, it'd be something else. The reason it stuck is because it was so many people's first peek behind the curtain into seeing that media in so many ways is collaborating with each other to push a narrative. I mean, we were just a bunch of random guys sitting around playing video games, and all of a sudden, these people who we commented on Reddit or YouTube, left comments saying we didn't like this. Suddenly, they're getting spots on Comedy Central. They're speaking at the UN.
Mm.
It's this massive network that seems to not be what it presents itself as. And it was so many people's first awakening to the idea that there's something fishy going on, and it just it proceeded from there.
Yeah, it was a massive grift, huh? Massive, absolutely massive. And then, so what else throughout the years that sort of, spurred you in the direction of Entropyrian? What other events, really struck you?
Trump, for sure. Seeing how crazy everyone went. That's why one of my songs is called "Fuck Trump." It's about what someone would have to think if they really believed everything they say about Trump. How absurd that would look. How ridiculous that would be. And I feel like when Trump came into office, all the masks came off, and it was just total war. It was total information war. Anyone who was not 100% on the correct side was deserving of 100% condemnation. And that just the sheer extreme quality of that, it felt very foreboding.
Yeah.
So that was probably the next biggest event along the way. And as that proceeded, one of the things that struck me as most dangerous about the cultural forces that I had first started to observe 7 years ago was how much they seemed to detest the idea of free speech, how much they seemed to think that that was not important in any way, shape, or form. And I remember talking to people about that and saying the weirdest thing, the most unsettling thing about these people who claim to stand for the oppressed is how much they seem to hate the concept of free speech. And at the time, I never would have guessed how far they would go with that. I mean, U.S. Government Disinformation Board?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
fake
Orwellian
news,
territory,
fact
right?
checkers.
Yeah.
Like, according to who? This is... I just wish I could take some of these people back 5 years and say, look at what you'll be supporting 5 years from now. You're scoffing at this. You're saying, those snowflakes, when they hit the real world, they're going to learn a lesson. No, you went to them and swore fealty. You went to them, and now you dare not speak against them. So I will.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. And then, of course, there's everything else, all the sort of the rise of, the shift from mainstream media to, very progressive and left-leaning narratives, that sort of accelerated over the last few years, and the rise of people like Joe Rogan, where like, whoa, it's like, to point to your point about freedom of speech, where, hey, you have a guy here, that's all he's about, right? He's inviting people, and they just talk, and lo and behold, it's interesting. Right? People have interesting things to say, and the sort of chasm, right, that's sort of started to appear in our culture, not just the culture itself, but also the social culture, right? So let me ask you this. So if you had to define sort of the counterculture, because we're sort of on topic here. So if you had to define the sort of counterculture heterodox movement, by saying what it favors, versus what it opposes, what would you say?
Free speech, free expression, the ability to have dialogues and have people who understand that free speech as a concept is valuable. This doesn't mean that I think that everyone's speech is equally valuable, but that the concept itself of free speech is valuable. And when you're making your value judgments, you need to hold free speech as a high value thing to be protected, to be defended, to be enacted where possible. That would be what I would say I am for if I had to define what I'm for as opposed to what I'm against. Because free speech is, without it, we're flying blind. Free speech is the self-correction mechanism for any society. It is the requirement for us to be able to self-correct. Without free speech, there is no ability to point out what we're getting wrong. And if we're not pointing out what we're getting wrong, we're going to crash.
Yeah, and I think Jordan Peterson said it best in his, I think he repeated that fact many times, which is to say that, people believe that they think, but they don't think. When we think when we speak, right? Because when we speak and when we hear ourselves talking, that's when we realize, what's going on in here, right? And if something that's coming out that doesn't make sense, for instance, someone, a couple goes into an argument and one of them says something that's, it's like, why did I say that, right? That's a good example of that phenomena, right? Well, it means that it's something that's been bubbling up to the surface and now you're just saying it, right? So canceling free speech in any form is well, it's detrimental to culture and cultural expression, and not to mention just, freedom for everybody, right?
It's not just that, you see, the danger in it of free speech is that people with dangerous ideas are going to be presenting dangerous ideas. But if you allow that to creep too far, then the people who would catch the dangerous people before they went full on into dangerous ideas are going to be silenced. The issue is that when you address certain topics, people call them third rail topics. Some people, as in sex, racism, violence, different things that are very taboo to speak about in public. But if you don't, you're going to leave everyone to go wherever they want for that. And wherever they want for that might be 4chan, it might be 8chan, it might be something really, really dark, because you shut up everyone who had something to say to them about that topic that could have explained to them why they were wrong to become so extreme. So the danger there is in not having free speech. The idea that people will not get bad ideas if you don't allow them to talk about them has to be one of the most absurd things I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of my main point when I talk about freedom of speech, is that I'd rather know if someone in front of me is anti-Semite, right? Because, I know exactly where that person stands and I don't need that person in my life.
And maybe
right?
there's something he doesn't understand about Jews.
No,
Maybe there's something he doesn't get. Maybe there's something that
absolutely.
he learned as a young child that made him get an idea that could be dispelled if he were to talk about it with someone who was not an asshole.
Yeah, no, exactly. It actually becomes an opportunity for someone, whoever's in front of that person to say, hey, why you're thinking that way. And then, it's like, well, because of this or that. And like, whoa, and then you can reply to that, right? But if you never know, if you don't know, if we live in a society where, even extreme speech is repressed, then, well, like you said, this schmuck will go to 4chan, right? Or he'll go through some back channel somewhere, right? And we'll find people that believe exactly what he believes, and he'll be stuck in an echo chamber, right?
Yeah, the First Amendment's just like the Second Amendment. If you ban speech, you're just going to get. If you ban speech on some topics, you're only going to get people who don't give a shit about your ban on those topics.
Yeah, it'll just go on the ground, right?
Right.
So to speak, right? And fester, right? and probably grow. I mean, look at Alex Jones, right? He, as soon as he was banned, he went on his own platform, and and I don't agree with pretty much everything he says, but and his character and his business model and whatnot. But look at what it did to him. It made him grow pretty much. And there's also the sort of the attraction effect, right? Oh, if this person is banned, it's probably because they have something to say that I probably that other people don't want me to hear, so I want to hear them, right? It's almost like the
Right.
teenage rebellion, right?
Yeah.
So and so where we are now at this point in time, with the culture and the state of it, how do you feel about it? How does it impact you, not just as an individual, but as an artist? I mean, clearly, if you were living in a time where freedom of speech was the de facto rule, I mean, I couldn't believe you would want to remain anonymous, for instance, right? So, I mean, there's sort of a starting point here, but, if you can talk about that a little bit more.
Well, it gives me a lot of material to write about. When I'm writing my songs, I try to, well, the songs with lyrics, with something to say. It gives me a lot to say. I try to pick something that isn't being said and say it loudly. That isn't to say it obviously. I find, to me, music that is too on the nose, lyrics that are too on the nose, they lose a lot of artistic quality. There's a way to do it where you say something just very directly and it comes out sounding good. That's not my way to do it, I don't think. Most of the time I try to be a little more subtle. I try to use some kind of allegory or some kind of metaphor, or at a bare minimum sarcasm.
Yeah.
And to make the point, I find the whole rah rah for my side to be a bit like boomer memes. It's a little done. So it gives me a lot of material to write about. And but as far as how it affects me, well, it concerns me greatly. I want my kids to grow up in a world where they don't feel like they're going to need to be anonymous if they're going to say what they think in music. I want them to grow up in a world that is still stable. The thing is that things have gotten so crazy right now that a lot of people are starting to doubt whether the world will remain as it is, in any way stable at all for very long. Everyone's talking about World War III or national divorce, or and then the other side has their topics too, their climate apocalypse and everything. Now, we've always had doomsday, we've always had doomsayers, but it just seems to be a lot more dominant right now. And I feel like it's very important for people with a platform or with artistic ability to pull us back from that brink.
Yeah, so it's to use culture for what it's supposed to be, which is the truth, right? And so tell me, what are your plans? What are your plans for sort of the near future? Where do you see Entropyrian going in the coming months, in the coming years? What are there topics that you'd like to tackle that you haven't tackled yet? Are there musical genres that you'd like to explore as well?
Well, speaking of musical genres, so when you and I were talking about the descriptor for this, and we landed on metal, it's what I intend to write. Now, here's the problem. When you're writing music, a lot of the time, I mean, unless you're a whole different kind of professional than I'm hardly a professional. The music takes you where it wants to go, not where you want to go. I don't have control over it. I sit down, I start fiddling around with a synthesizer or a guitar, or I just have something pop into my head one day, and I'll put that down into recording, I'll map it out, and then it'll go where it goes. So as much as I wanted Entropyrian to be a music project that was metal focused, it's more of just a music project in the end. Like Freya, it's not metal, but it sounds kind of like someone who likes metal made it.
Yes. Yeah,
It
exactly.
has a lot of those themes, a lot of the sort of epic melodies, musical progressions, some of the epic percussive elements. And if it's not metal, then I'm at least trying to make something that sounds that has my sound, which is sort of coming from a place of metal. But all of that to say, I would like to get more explicit metal out there
Hmm.
in the near future. As far as topics, um, I have one song about the Uniparty that I've been thinking about for forever, and I have a song about essentially the media's control over people's minds and people outsourcing their own determinations, their own thoughts to the media to do it for them,
Hmm.
and comparing that to the fall of Rome, comparing that to surrender to an invading force, and how
Hmm.
you have no more say in your own thoughts when you've surrendered them already to someone else, to what they want you to think. There's very little turning back from that.
Yeah, or at least it takes a generation, to
Yeah.
you know to go back where it was, so to speak, right? And by the way, I want to tell the audience, thank you for providing the musical bed track for the intro and outro to the podium. That's very nice of you. And Entropyrian was asking me if you'd like to sort of take that and make it into an own song. So I'm like, yeah, sure, go ahead. There's
If the
no
inspiration strikes, right? I wouldn't
absolutely.
want to I wouldn't want to sit here and go, "Oh, damn. That's really good. Oh, no, I can't make it. I already gave it to this podcast." No. I heard from you about that and I thought, well, this will be interesting. I've never done this before. I've never made something on request for a theme for a certain kind of product like a professional musician would. So I figured, okay, let's try it out. Let's set a goal and see if we hit it.
And
And
boy, it was fast. I think it was I think you sent it to me like the day after, pretty much. I'm like,
the
whoa.
goal was to do it in one day. So, and I did. I stayed up a little late, but I did.
And to be clear, when I asked Entropyrian about this favor, just hey, would it be possible? I actually asked him. It's like, if there's any track that's gathering dust in your drawers, so to speak, or something that you've created a while ago but never included in any of your songs, or something that's sort of leftovers, and you think it would fit with the podcast and the podium, could you share that with me? And because I saw it was so fast, I'm like, okay, there was something ready made, that just fitted properly. But then of course, he told me that no, that was sort of, it's made for, right? So so I was like, oh, okay. So there you go, right? It took pretty much a day. And so I'd like to sort of because we got in touch on Twitter, right? I don't recall exactly how it happened. You probably follow people I followed, and I was intrigued by your logo. That's probably the first thing that struck me. And then of course, I followed that, looked at your profile, and then visited your website, and then listened to the music, and then as your singles in the last few months got released, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool, and the music that you do is even though you self-proclaim as a one-man band, it's you still manage to give your pieces very high production values. It really sounds like it was done in a
Thank you.
professional studio and by not one person, right? And so we got in touch more directly, and then I sort of told you about Newtown, and so what's your reaction? I mean, we're doing this here, so obviously you agree with the idea of Newtown, but what was sort of your initial impression, and how do you feel it's something that as a society or as consumers, that's something that we might need, and how it sort of perhaps it gave you as like a sense of, hey, there are people out there who are actually thinking about culture and they want to do something about it, right?
Well, first off, I'm actually kind of surprised that I didn't run into more people like you, honestly. More people who were trying to focus on doing what we can with conscientious consumption. Basically, that would be the term I would put on it, is conscientious consumption. The idea that we're going to use our dollars to promote the kind of things we want to see more of. If you want to see more of something, give it money.
Yeah.
Very, very simple concept. I mean, how do you think a lot of Christianity is just, there's churches on every street corner in some parts of the United States, and it's because there's tithing. They ask their followers, hey, give us monetary gifts in order to promote this thing that you like called church. And it works. It really works. So if people want to make something change in the world, they need to give it money. So
yeah, well, which is just a tool, right? It's just a mean,
right.
Money as a tool, right? It's just a tool to create something, because things cost money, right? So and so it's yeah, and the more people have it, the more the bigger they can build whatever they want to build, right?
Well, right, you're going to be spending your entertainment dollars somewhere. Spend them on something you believe in or something you want to support or see more of, and there will be more of it. It's just the laws of supply and demand. So I think that Newtown is a great idea because it allows people a convenient and quick way to point them toward the kind of media they might want to support. Everyone doing this piecemeal with individual things, it works, but it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of research. So having a reference to help people do that, it's I hope it catches on. I hope a lot of people do it.
Well, that's the idea with this podium thing. So tell me, what's your how do you see the future? Let's say the next 5 to 10 years, from a sort of a cultural perspective, but also from a societal perspective. I mean, there's people need to know that I'm in Canada, but Entropyrian is in the US, and we've had an election which didn't really change much, or should I say at all, but there's an election in America that's coming up that could really shift the power, or even emblaze people on the left if they lose, or vice versa, right? So sort of an accelerator, right? So how do you see, and of course there's the real election in 2 years, right? So and and of course life is, if there's anything we can be sure of, is that life itself will throw us hardballs, or curveballs whenever it wants to, right? So so that being said, what's your feeling about the upcoming years? Where do you see this is going?
I've been kind of consistently wrong in a lot of my predictions over the last couple of years. And that's for a couple of different reasons. One, I think COVID revealed a lot of rot in the system, you could say, that went deeper than most of us would have ever guessed. Another reason is I actually do hope for the best, and I think that an optimistic view of the world gives you something to shoot for, and you have to have it. Like all these people saying, the US is going to have a national divorce. No, let's not do that. Let's aim somewhere else. Let's aim higher. I suppose I let my viewpoint get tainted by optimism, but I have to shoot for that. So I want to say that, to get into specifics, that the midterm elections in the United States will result in a great upheaval in at least the parties in power in DC. And I want to say that the current trends we're seeing with Disney, with Netflix, there was one more just recently that had that said something about how they were not going to be getting so involved politically. I forget what it was, but we're starting to see cracks in the dam where companies are not leaping to action to support leftist causes quite as vigorously as they used to, at least here in the United States. I saw the thread you did recently where you were talking about how arts in Canada are going, and it was looking pretty grim. But at least here, um, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, a lot of reason for hope. And even if there wasn't, we should try to have it anyway.
Yeah, well, the saving grace, in America is that it's still very much market driven, especially in the cultural institutions. That being said, there are tens of thousands of NGOs and tens of thousands of private foundations who fund these NGOs who the public doesn't even know they exist, right? So they don't have to fear any blowback from like Disney did, right? So they can just go on as they want, and nobody's going to bother them. And I'm also going to add, because I admire your optimism, but as for me, I sort of tend towards more of a pessimistic or very grounded outlook, and I tend to see, okay, if what's the worst that can happen. So I always have to keep that in mind to make sure that the barometer, right, the or the compass, right, my own compass, it's like, okay, whatever happens now in this world is it going in that direction or not? And if it does, then I have to do more to prevent that, in a sense, right?
So to expand on the optimism thing a little bit, I think one of the reasons that I would say that is because the greatest danger to the people who are trying to do good things in the world right now is that there's no hope. That's the gravest threat to people who are trying to change the world for the better, because it does look hopeless. It does look very daunting. It does look like, and it doesn't just look like, it is a fact that there's institutional capture at just about every conceivable level of authority, of government, of entertainment, of education, of medicine. So if you're too optimistic, the risk is that people will think that we won. All right, it's cool. Everything's good. No need to do anything. I don't think we're at risk of people believing that. I think the risk is that people will be discouraged and feel like there's no hope. So yeah, that's a little bit more expansion on the idea of promoting optimism, of celebrating small wins.
Yeah.
And keeping hope.
Okay, so sorry for this little cut here, but unfortunately ran into some internet connection problems. Of course, it had to happen now. So the last thing I'd like to ask you, Entropyrian, is it seems to me like like there's a disconnect. Well, not a disconnect, but there's a clash here between your optimism and the lyrics to your songs, or should I say the topics that you choose to cover. So what do you think about that?
So I find that you can start to feel excited about fixing a problem once you've diagnosed it. Just like if you're working on a car, once you realize what the issue is, or computer code, or anything, or any system, once you feel like you can put your finger on exactly what the problem is, then there's a rush of feeling like you've helped to fix it. And I like to think that that's the objective of a lot of my songs, a lot of the songs with lyrics anyway. So for example, the song Flow, it gets into the riots in 2020 and how a lot of people were supporting something I think is just an obviously a bad idea, to fund the police, and how much violence that idea has proven to have led to in the subsequent years. And in that song, after that frustration had been bouncing around in my head for a long time, it came out as an expression of decrying pop morality, decrying people choosing to support something just because it's fashionable, not
Mm,
because they want to fix anything. If they wanted to fix something, they would take care to whether the solution worked
mm,
and not to whether they were just agreeing with everyone who they want to look good in front of. And putting a finger on that specific issue in a song form felt like I was helping to fix the problem, and it helps one feel hope. Inhuman, a song I wrote about the vax mandates, it identifies the core of the problem as a return to a kind of religiosity,
mm,
with the metaphor of the vaccine as a baptism,
mm,
or a membership to a group, as an identity, more than a more than a cure for a disease. It's so much more than that to these people, and that's the core of the problem. If you talk about it in terms of disease and pandemics and everything, that doesn't make any sense, because that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with religiosity
mm.
manifested as scientism. And writing a song that, to me, in metaphorical words, makes that case, feels like I'm helping to fix the problem.
Yes, and it's also a timestamp of your own evolution, right? Because when you yourself, as an individual, realize that you've diagnosed, the issue, at least in your own timing, right? And
In
then,
my own opinion, yeah, as
yeah,
well.
no, but I mean, of your own. What I mean by that is, like, you've reached a point. I mean, we all see things at different point across time, right? So, like, some people were red pilled in 2015, and others were red pilled last year, right? So, but for you, when you sort of tackle an issue and you realize that, hey, this is where the problem is, at least according to my own viewpoint on the matter, then that's where the song flows coming out, right?
Right.
And so, in a sense, it's a timestamp of your own evolution as an individual and an artist to what goes on around you,
In
right?
a way, some of the songs that the time that the song is released would not necessarily be indicative of that. I think the first song that I had the idea for was something I want to make so badly, called Uniparty, which I mentioned earlier.
Mm,
And it's just talking about how the left uses the threat of the other side taking away their ovaries, and the right uses the threat of the other side taking away their guns. And it's a
mm,
puppet show. And they just don't care, but they use it to keep each other in line. And I've had this song bouncing around in my head for a long time now. And just because of how the music works, like I said earlier, I don't get to control it. I haven't made it yet. So it's not necessarily a timestamp when that could be relied on when the song is released. But yes, it does. It is sort of a picture of how one feels at a specific point in time. But then also, you start to grapple with writing a song, and you add on lyrics as the song takes structure. So
so
the lyrics could be from all over the place chronologically.
So, one last thing before we wrap this up. Could you give us a little preview of what your next song will be, in terms of themes, in terms of specific a problem or issue that it tackles, and of course also as well in terms of musically, what is there anything new that you're going to explore with this song from a musical perspective? Are there any new instruments? Are there any techniques that you've learned that you want to try out, and so forth?
So I actually just I changed DAWs. DAW would be a digital audio workstation. It's the name people give to the software that they use to record and produce music. I just changed DAWs specifically because the one I was using before, FL Studio, is not very good at mapping out drums realistically. And I switched to Cubase, which everyone who maps out drums realistically uses, pretty much. specifically because I want to make a real metal song. And again, I mentioned it earlier. It's about people surrendering their mind to an external authority to be their arbiter of truth. And I'm not positive that this will be my next release. I try to release fairly frequently, and I may actually put another song in between that one and now, because that one is going to be some serious work. But I want to make something, if I had to describe it, somewhere between Lamb of God and Dimmu Borgir. Maybe some septic flesh thrown in there for fun. And the song name is Ve Victis, and that's from a this incredible, I don't know if you would call it a podcast, or it's just a 6-hour monologue from Dan Carlin, Hardcore History, about the what he calls the Celtic Holocaust, about the Celts finding the Romans. And in this audio, he tells the story of the first sacking of Rome, when if it's the Gauls, if it's not the Gauls, I'll feel very silly. But the Gauls come to Rome, and the Romans make an agreement with them, saying, if we give you 1,000 pounds of gold, or whatever the measure was, right? Will you leave us in peace? And they agree to it. So while they're weighing the gold, the Romans say, hang on, those scales are messed with. Those aren't fair scales. And the leader of the Gauls walks up to the scales and throws his sword on one side of it and says, Ve Victis, woe to the vanquished. As in, you don't get a say. You surrendered. You do what we tell you now. And I feel like that is such a powerful allegory for people surrendering their minds to news media, to decide what goes in there and what does not, what they believe, what they don't. And once you've made that surrender, you can't, it's very difficult to claw control back. And I think it'd be a great metal song. Cool name, cool theme.
And great riffs.
Yeah. And yes, and hopefully great riffs. I've got some riffs bouncing around in there that need to be used.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. So I just want to sort of wrap up in the sense of telling people, well, thank you for watching. And as you saw, you'll see it in the outro here, but you can follow Entropyrian on Netflix. You can visit his website and check out, as he said earlier, there's the releases are somewhat frequent, right, on a steady pace, and you can even, if you, I would also
not Netflix,
not Netflix, no, but I will also actually even ask you to support him. If you like the music, there's actually links to every single, and you can purchase them on Bandcamp, even if it's $1. I'm sure any encouragement is in any form is probably very well received on your part. So I would encourage people to even take a step further. And as you said yourself, earlier, it's like, if you want more of something, just vote with your money. I think that's the best way, right?
I agree with this message.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being the inaugural guest on the podium, and thank you for being candid and for sharing all of this information with us. And any words to any closing statement?
Well, I wish I had something wise to say, but yeah, if you like what you've heard, if you like anything we've been talking about, please do check me out on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you listen to music. A subscribe counts for a lot.
Yes, and the freedom of expression, right? That's the thing. That's the goal, always. Absolutely. So until next time, take care, and you can reach either Newtown or Entropyrian on Twitter as well. So thank you very much, Entropyrian, for your time.
Thank you.
And for your generosity, and we'll see you next time.
All right.